Sorry.
Honorable members, I declare this 105th sitting of the National Assembly of the 12th Parliament of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to be duly constituted and in session. The clerk will lead us in prayers.
Almighty God, we are here gathered together, do most humbly beseech thee to guide us in all our consultations, so that we may together build a land where knowledge is free, where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, and where words come from the depth of truth. Grant us, O God, thine aid and guidance, so that we may deal justly with the several causes that come before us, laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and personal preferences, so that the result of our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion, the preservation of justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the President, and the peace and prosperity of Guyana. Grant us, O God, the vision so to lead, that all the people of this fair land may enter that state of brotherhood and unity, with the minds led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Messages from the President. Announcements by the Speaker.
You can carry on, Mr. Clerk.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc.
Honorable Minister Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance and the public service.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I now rise, sir, to present to this Honorable House the following. 1. Financing Agreement, credit number 7709 GY, credit A, and credit number 7710 GY, credit B, signed on May 21st, 2025 between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the International Development Association for amounts of 15.3 million special drawing rights for credit number 7709 GY, credit A, and 7.7 million special drawing rights for credit number 7710 GY, credit B. The purpose of this agreement is to finance the Caribbean Efficient and Green Energy Buildings Project. And secondly, financing agreement CCEFCF finance number TFOC 7029, signed on May 21st, 2025 between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Canada Clean Energy and Forest Climate Facility, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, International Development Association, acting as the administrator of the CCEFCF Single Donor Trust Fund for an amount of $8.2 million US. And the purpose of this agreement is also to finance the aforementioned project. That is to say, the Caribbean Efficient and Green Energy Buildings Project. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. The Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance. Minister Parag.
Mr. Speaker, I present to the Assembly the annual reports of the Police Complaints Authority for the years 2018 and 2023 on behalf of the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Clerk.
We have one from the Minister.
Minister of Education.
May I, sir, on behalf of the Minister of Education, present to this Honourable House the National Schools Board of Governors Amendment Order 2025, Order number 20 of 2025. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister.
Reports from committees. Oral questions without notice. Questions on notice.
Honorable members, there are 4 questions on today's order paper and are for written replies. 2 of these questions are in the name of the Honorable Member, Ms. Annette Ferguson, and are for the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President, with responsibility for finance and public service. Ministers asked that he given some more time to respond to these questions. The other two questions are in the name of the Honorable Minister, Ms. Tabitha Sarabu Hali, and it's for the Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance. The answers to these two questions have been received and they have been yes. And the two questions for the Honorable Parliamentary Affairs and Governance Minister, those two have been circulated. Sorry, let me check to see if these two answers, I know that,
They were circulated.
yes, Minister had indicated to me that those answers were to be circulated. So I'm confirming that they have been. So it's only the two questions for the Minister of Finance that have been deferred. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Ferguson.
thank you very much, sir. Pleasant morning to you and to members of the
Point
House.
of order.
Yeah. Well, I'm standing with regards to the two questions in my name, which you reported earlier that the honorable member is asking for additional time to provide the necessary responses. This, Mr. Speaker, I find very strangely.
Okay, so you're drawing attention to the announcement by the Speaker of the deferral. According to the standing orders, that's within the purview of the Speaker to allow for the deference at least once. Right? Thank you. Mr. Clerk?
Statements by ministers, including policy statements, personal explanations, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance, motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister, introduction of bills, public business, government's business.
Honourable members, we will now proceed with the second reading of the representation of the People Amendment Bill 2025, Bill number 9 of 2025, published on the 16th of May of this year. Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Mohabir Anil Nandla, SC MP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move that the Representation of People Amendment Bill 2025, Bill number 9 of 2025, published on the 16th of May 2025, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, it is now a publicly known fact that on September the 1st, the Republic of Guyana will be going to national and regional elections. At the beginning of our term in government, we made a promise that we will enact a slew of amendments to our electoral laws, including in particular the Representation of the People Act and the National Registration Act, as part of our promise to strengthen our electoral machinery, to make the electoral process transparent, to make those who are responsible for the management of the process accountable, and also to enact penalties that we think are sufficiently dissuasive in the event that some may think that they can attempt, as was done in 2020, to derail the election process. In delivering that promise, Mr. Speaker, in 2022, by Bill number 25, we enacted in this House a menu of amendments, several in number, covering a wide amplitude of areas under both the ROPA and the NRA. Abbreviations, of course, for the Representation of the People Act and the National Registration Act. We also, Mr. Speaker, consolidated and revised a number of different pieces of laws and amendments to these principal acts that were scattered all over, and that would have been passed over 2.5 decades. In the end, we now have a consolidated NRA and a consolidated ROPA, where these two mega pieces of election legislation have in them all the requisite amendments that will have passed over the last 3 decades. Mr. Speaker, that exercise was indeed a tedious one and a comprehensive one. And among the amendments that were affected was to create electoral sub-districts in 3 of the traditional electoral districts in the country, namely Electoral District 4, Electoral District 3, and Electoral District 6. The intent of those amendments are to ensure that in these very populous districts, we have the tabulation exercise, which would ordinarily have been done by the returning officer in one central place in each electoral district, that tabulation exercise, which is stipulated as a mandatory course in ROPA, and I believe it is called the ascertainment of the votes, to use the technical language of the statute, that this exercise will take place not in one central place, but will be done in electoral sub-districts, which we have created now using known electoral divisions which had existed in our system since we introduced proportional representation in the way that it now is in 2001, 2002. So, for practical purposes, for example, Region 4 or Electoral District 4 now has 4 sub-electoral districts. one called the East Bank of the Amarara, and the boundaries are known because the East Bank of the Amarara had always been an electoral division well demarcated and known, so we didn't create new boundaries. So the East Bank is one sub-district for Region 4. The East Coast, another sub-district. Again, the boundaries that are used are the boundaries that were always used to demarcate the East Coast. And North and South Georgetown, again using the conventional boundaries. And what will happen here, Mr. Speaker? The votes cast in each of these sub-districts will be ascertained by a new officer, now styled a supernumerary returning officer, in the particular sub-district. So what will happen here is that all the political parties' representatives, the observers, and all those who are statutorily required to be present at the ascertainment exercise will be present, but that exercise will now be conducted in relation to the votes cast in that sub-district, And the person instead who will be manning that exercise, or who will be in charge of that exercise, will be the supernumerary returning officer. For the listening public, it simply means that that exercise that we all famously saw, or that famous exercise that we saw, or that we all saw on March the 3rd, or beginning on March the 3rd, March the 4th, I think, at Ashman's building at the corner of Hatfield Street and Avenue of the Republic. That grand exercise that we all saw will now take place in Region 4 at 4 different centers. That obviously is being done to avoid the fraudulent fiasco which erupted at Ashman's building, and to avoid the electoral miscreants from unfolding their plans, which every election has seen them trying to unfold. And they are muttering here because they are uncomfortable. I have always said, Mr. Speaker, that bandits always will have a problem if you grill your house. It makes their job a little more tedious and difficult. So you will excuse the utterances that you are hearing emanating from the other side. So, Mr. Speaker, the amendment is very simple. And, Mr. Speaker, what occurred when we did the final draft and when we enacted the bill in 2022, we omitted, Mr. Speaker, to include in the definition of a supernumerary returning officer someone to deputize his or her functions. When one draws the analogy between this supernumerary returning officer and the returning officer, as the supernumerary returning officer will be a miniaturized version of the returning officer, you realize that the returning officer has a deputy in ROPA. But in the amendments which we did not include a deputy for the supernumerary returning officer. And that is all that this bill is intended to correct. You see, Mr. Speaker, in my view, when I first looked at it and I realized the omission, I thought that common sense, and logic would have allowed for an elastic interpretation that would accommodate the omission. Because in my view, a supernumerary returning officer, if he or she is not there, someone can deputize by operation of law and by normal grammatical canons of interpretation. But we are dealing here with electoral miscreants. And you can't leave anything. You can't leave anything to chance here. And you hear them? They're very annoyed that we are blocking this last hole, because this may have been an avenue that they were looking at, licking their lips and seeing, here's an opportunity for the cat to pounce on the milk. But we just take the milk and put it in the safe and we lock the door. So the cat has to now lick its lip dry. So, Mr. Speaker, that is what the bill is. I don't think my friends on that side can have any problem with this bill. They can't have any problem with this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, I know that the elections caught them, the election announcement caught them with their pants down. And we are seeing, Mr. Speaker, a lot of hemorrhaging on that side, a constant hemorrhaging. There may be serious blood shortage before the elections because there's bleeding from that side. Bleeding from that side. The wounds are gushing. And it is continuing. I am told that even today we will have an announcement from the floor. I am waiting. That's correct. I am waiting. I got a bird whisper to me quietly that we may even have an announcement here today. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment to this bill in my name, which I believe has been circulated or will be circulated in due course. And through that amendment, Mr. Speaker, I am proposing a deletion of one clause in the bill, clause 3, that sought originally to amend a section 33C1 of ROPA. We are today, Mr. Speaker, withdrawing this clause, and an amendment to that effect ought to be with the House already. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words and taking into account that my friends on that side are lovers of democracy and they would want to see our electoral system working competently so that we would not have a 5 months of impasse. Again, I am hoping that they will support this small but significant amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General, Honorable Member, Mr. Roysdale Ford, Senior Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is very right and proper that the Honorable Attorney General saw it wise not only to withdraw the proposed amendment to Section 33 of the Act, but that we came prepared this morning to vigorously oppose the presentation of that amendment to this Honorable Assembly. Mr. Speaker, it affords us, and particularly me, as the lead speaker on this side of the House, to indicate our position in relation to the electoral arrangements, the state of the electoral mechanisms and law after 5 years, even though we are now facing another elections. Mr. Speaker, for the last 5 years, this government has bandied about and said publicly about its commitment to a fair electoral system, but has failed repeatedly to bring before this honorable House the sort of legislation, the sort of amendments which will guarantee, really and truly, a fair, proper, and credible electoral system for this country. Mr. Speaker, if this bill had passed, the effect of it, really and truly, would have been to confer on the Guyana Elections Commission, particularly the Commissioner of Registration, the Chief Elections Officer, with a very disturbing power and authority to exercise, Mr. Speaker, to exercise a discretion, Mr. Speaker, in relation to whether persons who are qualified to vote will be allowed to be registered, and to permit persons who are disqualified to remain on the register. Mr. Speaker, that is just another manifestation of this government's persistence and determination to ensure that we have an electoral system that is not capable of generating a free and fair electoral system. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General referred to the analogy of people being locked up and grilled. But really and truly, Mr. Speaker, even after 5 years, it is the Guyana Electoral Commission which remains hostage by legislation, which remains captive by the inability of this government to provide the sort of electoral arrangements that will free itself and guarantee to this country the ability to deliver free and fair elections. Mr. Speaker, we've heard about recommendations and the need to bring before this honorable House proper legislation for our elections. But Mr. Speaker, this government has failed to implement the recommendations from every single election observer from the 2020 elections. Mr. Speaker, let's look at the CARICOM 2020 report. It says first that as a minimum condition of electoral reform, the CARICOM team recommends the urgent need for a total re-registration of all voters in Guyana. The government has failed to do so. The government has failed through the Elections Commission, which has representatives on board, to support the opposition's call for the total re-registration. Mr. Speaker, we look at the OAS report. They say, Mr. Speaker, that the official list of electors for the 2020 general and regional elections contains 660,998 names, a number that is relatively high in relation to the estimated population of Guyana, 785,000. In explaining the reasons for the bloating of the list, GCOM noted that it includes the names of persons who are dead or who no longer reside in Guyana. Currently, GCOM has no means of cleaning the list, save through the constitutional provisions for removal, a registered death, certified insanity on election offense through claims and objections period. In July 2019, GCOM commenced the house-to-house registration process in order to create a new National Register of Registrants database prior to the 2020 elections. This process was halted in 2019, August, after the Chief Justice held that residency is not a requirement for registration, and that the names already on the list of registrants and electors who were not captured during the house-to-house registration exercise could not be removed except through the constitutional provisions for removal in the National Registration Act. GCOM acknowledged that in these circumstances, it will be challenged in reviewing the list. In order to resolve this issue, the mission recommends comprehensive reform of voter registration, along with the necessary legislative authorizations for registration, changes to voters' lists, and the submissions of complaints about the exclusion or inclusion of voters, to undertake a house-to-house registration at the earliest opportunity upon the completion of the election and periodically thereafter. Voters who are at least 18 years old and who qualify to be placed on the list for the first time should be identified during the continuous registration process. Mr. Speaker, the Carter Center, which this government loves to speak about, says, looking forward, it's important to clarify and update Guyana's legal framework around voter eligibility and voter registration. In particular, the Carter recommends the 2007 legislation and clarification as to whether the introduction of continuous registration was meant to end the practice of repeatedly dissolving the existing National Register of Registrants and compiling a new voters registration process. Mr. Speaker, the European Union, in relation to this issue, says that, and they recommend that the government and GCOM undertake a thorough update of the decade-old register well ahead of the next election cycle, based on inclusive consultations and political consensus. At the same time, greater effectiveness of the continuous registration process. The Commonwealth Organization, Mr. Speaker, calls for a new National Register of Registrants to be completed. They point out the failure to complete that process between July and August 2019. And definitely they refer to the need of legislative reform. Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to bring that sort of legislation which is required. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, if this bill had passed, Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, if this bill had passed, it would have aggravated, Mr. Speaker. It would have aggravated, Mr. Speaker, the current problem that exists at the Elections Commission. Mr. Speaker, if this bill had passed, it would have aggravated the current problem that exists at the Elections Commission. We currently have, Mr. Speaker, a 7-member commission. And the record of voting and deliberations of this commission indicates that on each and every occasion, the chairman exercised a casting vote on each and every issue in relation to that issue. Mr. Speaker, the same election commission has, from the point of view of the election observers, they have recommended, Mr. Speaker, a creation and to a change of the structure of the electoral authority. The OAS recommends, Mr. Speaker, the mission observes the polarization among the members of GCOM and the challenge that this created arriving at a consensus. The division appears to exert undue pressure on the chairman and the use of his or her casting vote to resolve decisions before the commission. They recommend, Mr. Speaker, a multi-stakeholder discussion on the structure of the electoral authority in order to enhance the deliberative nature of this commission. Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to bring before this House any legislation that would resolve this sort of impasse that currently exists, that reduces this elections commission really and truly to the chairman. Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to bring before this House biometric legislation which would resolve the issues which emanated out of the last elections. Mr. Speaker, there is no rational argument which could be advanced for the omission, the failure of this government to bring biometric legislation. Mr. Speaker, in the Republic of Ghana, they were able to implement biometrics for millions of persons within 6 months. The government has failed to bring such legislation, which would only improve the electoral system and to reduce fraud, voter impersonation that marred the last elections. Mr. Speaker, we all know, and we're now days away from the 2025 election. And this commission, Mr. Speaker, has failed, the GCOM, Guyana Elections Commission, has failed to engage in any review, conduct any examination, prepare any report on the results of the last election and the management of that organization, GCOM, on the last elections. At the last elections, Mr. Speaker, the Guyana Elections Commission, and this cannot be forgotten or blown away, produced its own records, Mr. Speaker, which indicated that in District Number 1, 1,593 votes in 9 ballot boxes were impacted by allegations of voter impersonation, or 13% of the votes in District 1. Mr. Speaker, we now see why they don't want to bring the sort of legislation that is needed. Because they are the architects of electoral fraud. GCOM, the independent organization, this is their record of what happened at the last elections. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, what you are saying that this is the record, there are a lot of contentions. I don't know with that being the record. So I want to urge you to get back on track with respect to the amendment before us.
Mr. Speaker, what I am referring to, Mr. Speaker, is the official record of the Guyana Elections Commission that came out of the national recount, Mr. Speaker. I am not...
Honorable members, as I said, a lot of contention, legal challenges over that, which I don't want to raise here. So please, let's get back on track.
You are absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker. There are a lot of contentions, and the contentions lie in the fact that this government has failed to bring the sort of legislation that is necessary to correct this. That is the problem, Mr. Speaker. And my position today, Mr. Speaker, is not outside the confines of the debate. It is germane to the issue of a fair and credible election, Mr. Speaker. And I ask you with the greatest of respect, Mr. Speaker, to permit me to engage in a debate that would advance a fair and credible system. I'm not fabricating this information, Mr. Speaker. These are official records, and I've walked with them, Mr. Speaker. I could present them to this House. So we are speaking, Mr. Speaker, about a fair and credible arrangement. The Honorable Attorney General and his government from 2020 have been speaking about fraud. And the fraud must be identified. It must be recorded. And GCOM is the only recognized constitutional institution in this country that records it. And for the first time, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in the history of this country, it is beyond conjecture. It is beyond speculation as to what happened at an election. We don't have to engage in a debate. GCOM, by its records, its observation reports, its official records, have produced, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, you're back on the same track which I cautioned about. The point you made before you repeated that was that you're talking about what they failed, meaning the government, to do. That was the right track. Go ahead.
Failure of the government, Mr. Speaker, cannot be an abstract failure. It just can't be that they fail by themselves. They have to fail relative to what has happened. It is a failure that must be matched by facts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this GCOM that we're speaking about, the constitutional authority, based on what I've said so far, Mr. Speaker, they have failed based on the recommendations of the observers. They have failed to ensure that there's a proper house-to-house registration from 2019 to now. The observers have said so, Mr. Speaker. They have failed to conduct any sufficient verification of the process of the elections. They have failed to conduct a review, a comprehensive review. They have failed to identify any recommendations of its own. GCOM has even not brought forward one recommendation in the face of its dismal failure to guarantee a free and fair election to the people of this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, GCOM has failed to ensure from 2020 to now that the preliminary list of electors and the official list of electors comprise only those entries that satisfy the requirements and the criteria. Mr. Speaker, we have a commission that has admitted that there are people who are not qualified to vote and cannot remove their names. What I'm referring to, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that these are the consequences of its failure in 2020. And as we speak now, Mr. Speaker, those consequences are almost sure to occur again. In the failure of this commission, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, so Mr. Speaker, as we approach these elections, Mr. Speaker, we are facing, Mr. Speaker, another elections in which this government and that party has failed to implement, Mr. Speaker, the sort of legislation. Mr. Speaker, in every electoral district of this country, there have been recorded instances of vote impersonation that impacted the results of the elections. Mr. Speaker, the report of the Elections Commission, and I'd like to read this, Mr. Speaker. This is the report of the Elections Commission. And this is to conclude their report, Mr. Speaker, that in each of the 10 electoral districts, the summation of anomalies and instances of vote impersonation in districts 1 to 10 clearly does not appear to satisfy the criteria of impartiality, fairness, and compliance with provisions of the Constitution and the representations of the People's Act. Consequently, on the basis of the votes counted and the information furnished from the recount, it cannot be ascertained that the results for the districts 1 to 10 meet the standard of fair and credible elections. Mr. Speaker, we are at the same point, and this government has failed to bring before this House the sort of legislation that would correct these anomalies. They're guaranteeing, Mr. Speaker, guaranteeing a continuous failure, Mr. Speaker, of GCOM and its obligations. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member, Mr. Royziel Ford. And now for the Minister of Local Government and Regional Development, the Honorable Sonia Parat.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while my friend spent his energies mildly grandstanding on Section 33C, which he no doubt prepared for in depth, and came to this honorable House expecting that he would be presenting and clearly could not rewire his brain to go to just Section 2, after preparing a speech, he just had to continue with the speech and the debate of Section 33C on very hypothetical situations. Since we have withdrawn, on the government side, we have withdrawn the Section 33C from this amendment, so that no longer is debatable at this point in time. And Section 2 is the one which we are debating on. I am sorry to say that perhaps my friend was speaking to a different crowd and not the one in here. However, allow me please, Mr. Speaker, to state that I was, like a lot of my colleagues here on this side of the House in 2020, a part and parcel of the elections process that took place from March 2nd, 2020, all the way to the 2nd of August, 2020. And the plethora of obstacles and trauma and distress that was caused by a few had very little to do with our act or the representation of the People's Act. It had every single thing to do with individuals and rogues who believed that they can somehow fix the system, trip the system, or somehow twist the system to suit what they wanted. And so, Mr. Speaker, to begin with, the ROPA and the Section 84 and those sections that existed in that act, in that principal act, was provided a very strong system, an electoral system that worked, and worked very well on the 2nd of March, as a number of us would have observed the elections process and known that the day itself went very smoothly. It was when people decided to use spreadsheets with different numbers that did not reflect those numbers on statements of polls. It was when people decided they want to put their name on a declaration for Region 4, when the votes were incomplete and the tabulation and verification process was incomplete at that time. And the point of trying to thwart the will of the people, irrespective of who those people voted for, irrespective of their violation of our Constitution and fundamental rights of people, holding up an entire country hostage for 5 months, inclusive of those who supported them. And so they come now to say that enough was not done to cure the system. And somehow that commission that would have worked for them had they been able to get that rigging through and get to a point of being in office after that 5 months, that commission, chaired by the chairwoman, would have been a perfect commission for them. So to stand here now and say we need to change we need to look at the commission and we need to do this, these are all ideas that they want them to suit their narrative and the way they want to be able, again, to infiltrate and perpetrate fraud on the system. Mr. Speaker, the system, as we promised when we got into office, we will relook at the laws that govern the electoral process. And we have done that with wide consultation from all sections of society. And it wasn't a month or two of consultation. It was a lengthy period of consultation to get to that point of having an amendment that was suitable to what different categories of the country thought that we should have in our electoral laws. And the opposition was consulted. They were consulted. So at the particular time that we were having consultations for this, and that is not something. It was up on the website for the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance for the consultation for you to have a look at. But you know, and presentations right here. But you know, Mr. Speaker, in good fashion, anything that you give to them, they don't read it. They don't read it. They come here and they talk off. It's just now we're here to say that we have withdrawn 33.6. Yet they are still talking about 33.6, the entire presentation on 33.6 and nothing on 2, what we are debating here before us. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise and lend my support to the representation of the People Amendment Bill 2025 that has been brought to this Honorable House by our Attorney General. Clause 2 of the bill seeks to make a simple yet significant change. It amends Section 2.1 of the Principal Act to update the definition of supernumerary returning officer. This revised definition will now include both supernumerary returning officers for polling sub-districts in regions 3, 4, and 6, as well as deputy supernumerary returning officers. It is a targeted insertion, but its importance must not be overlooked. Mr. Speaker, for those who may ask why such a change is necessary, let me be clear. This is a clarification driven by the realities of electoral administration and the evolution of our laws to meet modern challenges. The term supernumerary returning officer was previously undefined in a way that covered the growing operational demands within our 3 largest electoral districts. What we have now inserted reflects the practical structure already being used in our elections, one that allows for greater decentralization of tabulation, quicker response times after the close of polls, and more effective oversight of sub-districts. No longer should we have to be sitting in a country waiting 5 months for the results of our elections that we already can know within hours of the tallying and the ascertaining of those votes after the close of polls. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that would have run smoothly if we didn't have those individuals who were in GCOM at the time and elsewhere who thought that they can come together, conspire to rig the elections. Far from an arbitrary legal change, it is the product of needed legislative reform brought about by this administration after the distressing events that surrounded the 2020 elections. We are reminded painfully so that the electoral process can be subverted not just by overt inference, but by quiet deviations from protocol. The new definition supports a structure that is more robust, layered with accountability, and one where the duties of all officers, from presiding officers to tabulating officers, are clearly assigned, codified, and reinforced. Only last month, Mr. Speaker, the Guyana Elections Commission released its revised election day training manuals. These manuals, prepared in accordance with the law and with feedback from political parties, now guide the training of polling staff and management officers. It is not coincidental that those manuals include comprehensive sections on the roles of supernumerary returning officers and their deputies. The very definition we are now inserting finds its practical footing in those manuals, which are already being used across the country to prepare election staff. The inclusion of deputy supernumerary returning officers, explicitly recognized in this bill, is one of the quiet enablers of a broader level of reform, which has received support from all sections of our local society, as well as our international partners. These officers play a critical role throughout the electoral process, and their functions are tightly regulated. Moreover, their presence ensures that no single officer or location becomes a bottleneck in the declaration of results, which we would all agree, Mr. Speaker, can be a source of uneasiness for our country, and it can actually emanate into so much drama and trauma in our country. Mr. Speaker, in Regions 3, 4, and 6, the volume of polling stations and statement to poll necessitates the creation of sub-districts, and supernumerary returning officers assigned to those sub-districts must not be political figures. They are administrative staff. They have statutory responsibilities. They must maintain logs, receive ballot boxes, verify statements of poll, and display results using electronic mechanisms. This decentralized structure is one of the many safeguards to protect the transparency and efficiency of our elections. Rogue elements simply have no place in our modern democracy and will not be tolerated. Mr. Speaker, we cannot rewrite the past or erase the deep scars etched into our national consciousness by repeated efforts to undermine the democratic process, efforts in which, regrettably, some of my friends on the other side of this House have enjoyed. But what can we do? We must do. But what we can do and must do is legislate for a future where the rules are clear, the systems are strong, and the avenues for interference are firmly closed. That is precisely what this amendment is, and many others brought by this Parliament is designed to achieve. I will say this with all due responsibility. Elections belong to the people, not to the politicians. And the machinery that delivers those elections must function independently, impartially, and without interference. That principle must be backed not only by rhetoric, but by law. The Representation of the People Amendment Bill 2025 is one small but essential step in that direction. I therefore have no hesitation, Mr. Speaker, in commending this bill to the House and giving it my unequivocal support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And now for the Honorable Member, Mr. Sherrod Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I cannot allow some of what the previous speaker, the Honorable Sonia Parag, had said in the National Assembly to go unchallenged. Now, I would like to recommend a couple books for the Honorable Member. There is one by the title Weaponized Lies by a famed author. I want to recommend on her reading list, if the Minister reads, by Daniel Levitin. Fantastic piece of literature, Weaponized Lies. I want to recommend as well another text, How Democracies Die, by Stephen Levitsky. And I want to recommend by one of the most profound thought leaders of the 21st century. I want to recommend Nexus by Noah Yuval Harari, a fantastic text. How Nexus. One of the tenets of the last two that I've recommended for the Honorable Minister is democracies that have all the hallmarks of a functioning democracy. But when you read the fine prints, as Forbes Burnham has advised us to do, is not what is written on the line, but what is written between the lines that matters. You will find this government wanting at every turn. Mr. Speaker, just this morning, we have WhatsApp Gate, we got GRA Gate, we got Lamborghini Gate, and who has given approval. When you examine this government, you find them wanting at every single level. So I want to start by saying, giving my recommendations to the Honorable Member. And the Honorable Member has spoken a long time about GCOM and the operations there. Now, I have heard a lot spoken over the last few months, the last few years, it is important to note that since 2020 and a lot of bogus charges that were brought against a lot of members of GCOM and elsewhere, you have not had one conviction with a plethora of evidence that the Honorable Attorney General has stated lots of time in the public domain it exists and can't truckloads of evidence. You have had not one single conviction in 5 years. As a matter of fact, we will go to the next elections with matters pending from the last election, and that is an indictment on this government who has sought every turn to come here and lecture us about good governance and accountability, and you name the whole gamut of it, and they will come here and they will pretend as though their last internal PPP conference wasn't rigged, and and all of those things. They will talk about rigors. They have such a fascination with rigors. They're collecting a lot of them. Of recent, you will see a lot of what they tout as endorsement of the same people they accuse of rigging one day, and they are welcome into the bosom of the PPP the next. If the PPP wants to enter into a coalition with the APNU AFC, they only need to ask, and we bring them to the table and we say, but they see this is a backdoor government. So they want to come through the back door, and they've been accepting a lot of these people who, as I said, one day they are riggers, and the next day they are welcomed with open arms, including a member of the National Assembly here who has usurped a seat for many months. But we were never fooled. The Guyanese people were never fooled. We knew who kept her here. We knew that if there was political will in the assembly, we could return that seat to the rightful owner of the seat. That rigged process, that we could return it. And I don't even want to...
Honorable Member, I was restraining myself from interrupting you, but we have an unparliamentary word. That one is in our list, right, that you just said, and I've repeated. In one presentation I made in this house, referring to I use fixed.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So it is very, very telling, and I think the government ought to check its own self, that it cannot with a straight face come into the National Assembly and talk about rigors, and then perhaps before the day is out, you will see a rigor endorsing the government and endorsement they hold dear, Mr. Speaker. But that being said, I'm still responding to the Honorable Sonia Parag, because as these very cases that touches and concern our electoral process and the need they have proffered for electoral reform, they have been very telling. I mean, when you listen to Roslinda Rasool, for instance, who went from an observer one day in this country to sitting at...
Honorable Member, standing order, raising the name of someone who is not in the House. Please.
Mr. Speaker, I rather suspect you're going to stop me several times during the course of this presentation.
No, not at all. In fact, if you remember our conversation years ago when I said, I love your presentations and I don't like to interrupt you. So please.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Gracious Speaker. What we have seen in the public domain emanating from different quarters in this country seems to run counter to what the government has said repeatedly over the past few years. We have had admissions from persons employing the government high up in the Foreign Affairs Ministry who talk about SOPs that were left unattended for many hours, yes. who talk about who kicked in doors at GCOM, who frightened the high officials. And I hope we get to also who left the precincts of our apex electoral body in this country with the SOPs on a server for many hours. I hope we get a chance to interrogate that. So the whole narrative is changing. The entire narrative is changing. So those are some of the issues. Those are some of the issues that we're contending with. And so for those who want to know where the SOPs are, they ought to contact the man who had left with the servers with the SOPs. He might have a good idea where the SOPs are. Point it in that direction. Right? You have done enough on that front. You have done enough on that front. That being said, Mr. Speaker, let me touch on some other issues as concerns this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is not a new issue that is with us currently. It is not a new issue. Regretfully, it is not a new issue. And one of the challenges we have had, and one of the challenges we have brought us here, is a political will to have genuine constitutional reform. The fact that we have amended this piece of legislation before, and now we're back in the Assembly again to amend it again, right, and to pull back a portion of it, talks about the very haphazard nature in which this government has gone about electoral reform. Now, they have done this in particular instance where it suits them. And the evidence is clear. The evidence is there. One only needs to look. Now, when we look back at some of what has happened over the last 4 or 5 years, everything that has been done in this National Assembly where the amendment of legislations are concerned is particularly or are particularly suited to the proliferation, the propagation of power, the extension of power by the PPP. You name any piece of significant legislation that has come before this Assembly to be amended, and you can go through the whole gamut of it. We have had to deal with gerrymandering of our boundaries. All of that tend to favor the incumbent government. It was GCOM itself that pulled back, that spoke very strongly that it had the remit to change the boundaries and not the Minister of Local Government. You look at the legislation that pertains to residency requirement and what they have done with that. All of that seeks to perpetuate the PPP in government. You look to see what they have done, for instance, with the birth certificate issue in terms of the Registration of Birth and Death Amendment Act of 2021, and it goes to perpetuate the PPP being in power. Mr. Speaker, I just came back from Region 1, where I saw a lot of things that should not be happening in this country. Mr. Speaker, the Amerindian hostel in Region 1 has been overrun by our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, and they tell us, the Warrows and others, they tell us that they're waiting for passports and birth certificates from Georgetown because this piece of legislation facilitates that. And there's a particular reason why 2 years after and $2 billion later, we are no closer to the results of the census, because the census will tell us who have left. And this piece of legislation here, where the registration of births and deaths is concerned, will tell us who they want to come and to pad the list. Every piece of legislation, when you trace it, you will see what we're talking about. And I wouldn't touch on some of this traverse territory that the Shadow Attorney General Royce Ford has touched on in terms of the plethora of recommendations from the EU, from the Commonwealth, from the Carter Center, the plethora of recommendations that have been untouched in 5 years for a government that says they take electoral reform seriously. Untouched, all of it, from all of the international stakeholders, the observer missions, and it makes for very, very interesting reading. And so, since the learned Royce Ford has touched on that area, I don't want to traverse that any more than I should. Now, we were told, I want to touch this aspect, we were told of a national, a new EID card, millions of US dollars put towards that. What has ever happened to that? This government is a catalog of unfinished projects, half-baked ideas. $34.5 billion, the learned Royce Ford says the cost for these EID cards. All of that is to impact on what is happening here. And while they want to do all of that, Mr. Speaker, these are our colleagues, the honorable members on the other side. They would tell us that the biometrics is too difficult to do. Because why, Mr. Speaker? It doesn't favor them. It does not favor their perpetuation of power. It does not favor them staying in office. So they would never find it, even though just after they had lost the 2015 election, it is there for public record, they were the ones championing these very things.
Very good point.
But they have no concern with that currently. Mr. Speaker, I want to spend a little time on this whole issue of the electoral reform. The Chief Justice and the learned Chief Justice acting and the learned Chancellor acting, they have been victims of this. They have been victims of a system that we know is wrong, but we don't have the political will in this country to change it. You've had the recent past president of the Caribbean Court of Justice. You've had the recently re-elected Bar Association president, all of whom have said we should solve this problem. And we on this side, we have already indicated our willingness to solve this problem. But again, it does not augur well for the government. So they have seen no urgency in changing the status quo. As a matter of fact, this government said to the people of this country, let us wait and get the Judicial Service Commission. Let us wait and get the Judicial Service Commission in place, and then we will affirm these two high offices. That has come and gone. 2 years later, we are waiting, and we know we will go to the election, and this will be yet another unfulfilled promise of this administration. And as my colleague said, first order of business when we are returned to office on the 1st of September, on the 2nd of September. Mr. Speaker, I said all that to say, Mr. Speaker, I said all of that to say, it was just only recently in a decision out of the High Court that the Chief Justice has had reason to say that our electoral laws are all over the place, Mr. Speaker. And after 5 years in government, this government that says they want to tout how much legislation they have passed through this National Assembly and how much they care, but this is never the right legislation, and this is never the right way in which to show people really and truly that you care. That the Chief Justice has said that the electoral legislation in this country, the electoral laws in this country are all over the place, and it is difficult for the ordinary person to understand that. If this government had any intention of real electoral reform, they would have pursued this from day one. But pursuing electoral reform might shorten their tenure in government, so they have no real interest in that. So don't let them come here and kerfuffle us, at least attempt to, because the truth is out there. The Guyanese people have had their lived experience under this administration and all of their false promise. You could see schools, or what's supposed to be schools, abandon $2.6 billion, and they will come and tell you that we are for education in Region 1. You will see, of course, the hostel overrun, as I said, by our Venezuelan brothers and sisters, and they will come and tell you, oh, we care for the indigenous people, right? We still, and a whole host, a whole plethora of issues, Mr. Speaker, you will see perpetuated in this country, embraced by this administration, and then they will come and try to lecture us. Haven't seen all that we have seen, Mr. Speaker, but we are not moved by that. We are not moved by any of that. By you, Mr. Prime Minister. I note the Vice President was very reserved and took a long time to say whether the PM would be returning if they win the next administration. Very reserved the last press conference. That being said, Mr. Speaker, on the ROPA legislation, on the issue of the ROPA legislation, Mr. Speaker, by the very nature, the haphazard nature of this government, this is a AG who has stood before this House to say that when he looked at it, it should have been common sense to omit or to add. It should have been common sense to get it right the first time if this government had really had any intention of proper electoral reform. Not to come here and tell us that he looked at it. Where did the amendment emerge from? Where did the amendment emerge from? Mr. Speaker, if we are serious, we really have to sit down together. The PPP have tried to do it on their own. That is why the learned AG got all of these regrets this morning. They have tried to do it on their own. It is time they sit down with some people who actually understand the law, like some of my learned colleagues on this side, and others as well who might not be in this chamber. And let us look at these things in a holistic way and in what is in the best interest of Guyanese. You see, Mr. Speaker, as I close, it's only so far endorsements can get you, But when the endorsement finishes, we got to settle down to the hard work of moving this country forward. We got to settle down to the hard work of bringing proper legislation before the National Assembly that serves in the interest of all Guyanese and not just a select few, not just friends, family, and favorites. And these amendments, even with the one they have withdrawn, when taken together, Mr. Speaker, when taken together, really says that these suggested changes that have come from the government are really and truly just haphazard way of going about doing it, and to really and truly to keep themselves in power with the pretext as though they are substantive and significant legislative changes. And Mr. Speaker, when taken together, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support the amendment that is proposed here this morning. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Mr. Duncan. Now for the Honourable Member, Miss Halley.
The Attorney General and thus the government chose to delete Clause 3 of the ROPA Amendment Bill. The amendment to the bill. I am very glad to see that good sense has prevailed, as the impact that 33C1 was likely to see or to show a fundamentally weakened system of checks and balances embedded in our electoral laws. While this is indeed welcomed, I rise here not simply to address a particular clause in this bill, but to present a thorough assessment of a disturbing pattern, a pattern that I believe threatens the democratic foundations of our cooperative republic. Mr. Speaker, I know that the other side would be quick to say that I'm making much about nothing. But permit me, Mr. Speaker, to contextualize the legislative development since 2021. When we examine the electoral and civic legislations passed or proposed in the last 5 years, a trend emerges, one marked by centralization, reduced statutory obligations, and increased administration. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, we have witnessed a succession of legislative amendments that, taken together, reflect a troubling shift in the balance between democratic oversight and executive discretion. Let's start with Bill number 24 of 2022, which was assented to on December 5th, 2022, Mr. Speaker. This bill, while introducing procedural updates, shifted significant authority away from Parliament and towards internal GCOM regulations. The publication of statement of polls and protocols surrounding electoral results, previously matters of public record and statutory procedure, are now subject to internal rules. This bypasses the principle of democratic oversight. Regulations can be changed quietly behind closed doors without debate or public consultation. The lack of parliamentary scrutiny over such critical matters undermines the transparency and predictability essential to democratic processes. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 23 of 2022, the National Registration Amendment Bill, which was also assented to on December 5th, 2022, consolidated power in the hands of the Commission of Registration. While streamlining the voter registration process is important, this law lacks any mandatory mechanisms for transparency. There are no requirements for public reporting, no provision for third-party audits, and no clear standards for the inclusion or removal of names. Worse still, this change comes amid credible reports that undocumented migrants, particularly Venezuelan nationals, are being granted Guyanese documentation without proper source documents. These individuals are at risk of being added to the OLE, skewing electoral demographics and potentially compromising election outcomes. In the absence of oversight, Mr. Speaker, such inclusion becomes a political tool. The passage of the 2022 Amendment Bills 23 and 24 allowed for the consolidation of electoral administrative powers in GCOM and the Commission of Registration, and increased reliance on regulations and administrative discretion, with fewer statutory safeguards or obligations. The implications of this, Mr. Speaker, is that this setup now allows a single actor or partisan majority to control the pace and conditions under which elections are prepared, undermining the role of the Elections Commission as an independent constitutional body. Then we had Bill number 10 of 2021, the Registration of Births and Deaths Amendment Bill, assented to on 9th of August 2021. This law, Mr. Speaker, aimed to modernize civil registration, particularly birth and death records. However, while it introduces digital modernization, this bill law fails to mandate automatic syncing between the registrar's database and the National Register of Registrants. This leaves the door open for deceased individuals to remain on the voters list for extended periods. Electoral fraud thrives where controls are weak, Mr. Speaker. Failure to ensure that death records are promptly and automatically updated in the voters' register compromises the integrity of the electoral roll. It also undermines confidence in GCOM's competence and impartiality. Such a gap is not administrative oversight. It is an invitation to fraud. When we add the non-disclosure of the 2022 census to the conundrum that what do we get, Mr. Speaker? Imagine, Mr. Speaker, the national census, the key tool in any civilized country which would be used to understand the demographic realities and calibrate electoral systems, remains unreleased more than a year after its completion. This is unprecedented. It deprives the public and electoral stakeholders of crucial information needed to assess the size and composition of the electorate. Without access to census data, we cannot evaluate the validity of the OLE. Is it bloated? Is it underrepresentative? We don't know, and therein lies the danger. Lack of access to public data fuels speculation, it fuels mistrust, and the perception of manipulation. Mr. Speaker, permit me to now turn to how these legislative amendments made between 2021 and 2023, and also what we have here today, when it's analyzed against the EU Observer Mission final report on Guyana's 2020 elections. I thought that this was necessary, Mr. Speaker, so that we can get a clear indication of whether this government used the 5 years they had in office to implement any of the recommendations made by all the observer reports to ensure our electoral process is less weak than it was heading into the 2020 elections. Were any of the changes made between 2021 and 2025 in conformity with the recommendations made by the EU Observer Mission? Mr. Speaker, the EU EOM focused on the fragmentation and the opacity in our electoral laws, the limited public access to legal texts, and GCOM's reliance on unpublished verbal directives, and thus recommended the consolidating of our election legislation and increasing of transparency in rulemaking and results tabulation. Have any of the legislation in the past 5 years accomplished this, Mr. Speaker? No. The EU EOM recognized that the OLE was inflated, which in their view raised credibility concerns. They also remarked that they believe that the continuous registration method that GCOM utilizes is ineffective, as there is poor syncing with civil registries, such as the fact that deaths were not being timely removed. Did any bill come to this House over the past 5 years to try and rectify this issue? No, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bills number 23 and 24 of 2022 and the National Registration and the ROPA amendments shifted authority and came into direct conflict with the EU recommendations for statutory procedures, published regulations, and reduced discretionary powers. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 10 of 2021, the Births and Deaths Registry Amendments, fails to mandate automatic syncing between death records and the OLE, leaving a critical weakness unaddressed, contrary to EU's recommendation that deceased voters remaining on the list could be exploited for fraud. Where does this leave us as Guyanese, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, it is my opinion that the EU's 2020 final report urged Guyana to do a couple of things: reduce discretion in electoral administration, consolidate and clarify legal frameworks, mandate transparency in all aspects of electoral conduct, and ensure a robust and clean voters register. But instead, Mr. Speaker, from 2021 to now, the legislative amendments that have come to this House and the one we are currently debating have done the opposite. They have expanded GCOM's discretionary power without corresponding transparency safeguards. They have reduced statutory obligations, such as mandatory voter list revision. They have delayed or restricted data access, for example, the census results. They have enabled opaque voter registration practices, especially concerning foreign nationals. These recent amendments, Mr. Speaker, represent a steep regression from the principles of democratic accountability and electoral transparency advocated by the EU. They centralize power within GCOM and the executive, enable selective enforcement of electoral procedures, and weaken the public's ability to scrutinize elections. If left unaddressed, this trajectory could further erode Guyana's democratic integrity and increase the risk of electoral manipulation or public unrest. Mr. Speaker, if we were to take all the amendments assented to and the one being debated today and try to determine what impact it is likely to have at our upcoming elections, what we are likely to see, Mr. Speaker, are the following: deceased individuals remaining registered due to an unsynced registry, Commonwealth citizens with no meaningful ties to Guyana being allowed to vote, Venezuelan migrants hastily naturalized or undocumented casting ballots without full verification, and the 2022 census still withheld, making verification of the total voting population impossible. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that the current government has a major blind spot, as they seem to spend little time considering how the decisions they make will be perceived by the general population, or maybe they simply do not care. However, Mr. Speaker, the dangers of expanding GCOM's discretion are not theoretical. They have been validated by the conduct of GCOM, as recently documented by its opposition commissioners in their May 27, 2025 statement. They revealed, Mr. Speaker, that GCOM had at that point failed to finalize an election work plan before speaking to the President, that they were silent key decision makers and cancelled meetings without notice, that the GCOM unilaterally declared an election date contrary to the Commission's own timeline, and arbitrarily reduced statutory deadlines for candidate submissions, appeals, and claims and objections. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the proposals for biometric and fingerprint-based registration dating back to 2023 have been stonewalled without valid justification. This shows that even beneficial discretionary powers are being consistently ignored. GCOM's refusal to act in the public interest unless legally compelled reinforces why mandatory provisions must remain untouched. The opposition commissioners, Mr. Speaker, have confirmed what many feared, that GCOM refers legal queries directly to the Attorney General, who is a partisan government actor. Internal legal officers who disagreed with this process were removed. This undermines the constitutional requirement for GCOM to operate as an independent body. It is precisely why checks and balances, not discretionary authority, must govern the Commission's operations. The result, Mr. Speaker, is an electoral process in which the public has no faith and a democracy eroded not by revolution, but by administrative creep. These legislative adjustments, while individually may be defensible in some cases, collectively create the framework for centralized control. A state in which electoral mechanics can be quietly manipulated is not a state governed by the rule of law. It is a state governed by the preferences of a few. Democracy is not defined solely by elections, Mr. Speaker. It is defined by how those elections are conducted, by who can vote, and by how the process is managed. When discretion overrides law, and when electoral systems lack transparency and accountability, democracy itself is at risk. Mr. Speaker, with everything that has come to light over the past couple of months, this government must feel some sense of urgency to rebuild some amount of trust with the citizens whom they serve. If they so desire, I would like to propose the following. I first urge the government to release the full results of the 2022 census immediately, enabling a proper audit of the OLE. I urge the government to mandate technological integration between the registrar and the NRR to ensure automatic updates on births, deaths, and citizenship status. I urge this Parliament to establish an independent, multi-stakeholder oversight committee with auditing powers to review GCOM's performance and voter registration practices. I urge this government to regulate non-citizen voting eligibility, codify clear enforceable rules on the inclusion of Commonwealth nationals requiring proof of long-term residency and lawful status. I urge a parliamentary review of GCOM's regulations, requiring that all significant electoral regulations be subject to parliamentary debate and approval before implementation. Time and time again, Mr. Speaker, this government seems unable to understand that when governing an entire country, one must take into consideration how those persons that you are elected to serve would respond to the decisions that you make. Of course, Mr. Speaker, there will always be times when some difficult decisions have to be made for the safety, security, and well-being of the citizens. What must be recognized, Mr. Speaker, is that when it comes to matters of people's freedoms and elections, making decisions that even appear to be biased or unjust would always draw the ire of the populace and further erode any semblance of confidence and trust that the citizens may have in you. Maybe the Attorney General can, when he closes up, answer whether GCOM, an independent constitutional body, whose mandate requires it to at least appear to be unbiased, should be dependent on the advice of a perceived biased and politically appointed Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. But who knows? It has become quite evident that those who lead seem incapable of understanding what servant leadership and good governance requires. Mr. Speaker, we are at a crossroads. We can choose to protect our democracy, to strengthen our laws, and to rebuild trust in our institutions. Or we can choose to stand idly by as democracy slips through our fingers. These amendments may seem bureaucratic, but their effects are profound, Mr. Speaker. They determine who gets to vote, how votes are counted, and whether our nation can call itself a functioning democracy. I urge this Parliament to reject everything that has come thus far and to revisit the legislative changes of recent years and to recommit to the principles of transparency, fairness, and democratic governance. Let history remember us not as silent enablers, Mr. Speaker, but as defenders of Guyana's democratic soul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now for the Honorable Member, Ms. Amanza Walton Dizzy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I note the Honorable Attorney General's withdrawal or amendment to the bill in which he sought to withdraw Clause 3. It's very, very interesting that he chose to do that, because I think the Honorable Attorney General recognized that he was erring. Because when he proffered the amendment in 2022, he went to great lengths to say to us, and let me find the quote because I don't want to misquote him. These amendments are to prevent further abuse of the electoral system and promote transparency. And of course, in those amendments, he used the word shall, because I think the Honorable Attorney General recognized the importance of shall, the importance of mandating that particular function, because it is a cornerstone function of our democracy. And so for him to come here this morning and to withdraw it, I am happy. And I suspect that the Honorable Attorney General thought that by withdrawing it, we would not engage in debate. Well, I have news for the Honorable Attorney General. He's wrong. Again, you know, Mr. Speaker, I will say this. The AG clearly thought, the Honorable Attorney General clearly thought that when he withdrew this, that we would not engage in further scrutiny. He realized that by opening up this legislation to debate, that he was opening the door for us to make some important observations. And he wanted to preclude it. And I've sat and I've listened to them saying, oh, they came prepared to speak about Section 33C. But I want to say to us and the Guyanese people that the mischief is not in Section 33C. Don't be fooled by the sleight of hand. The mischief is in that work plan that GCOM has prepared. That is where the mischief is. Because, you know, I had a question for the Honorable Attorney General when he was saying, oh, I will remove, I withdraw the amendment changing shall to may, as to what mischief he intended to cure by this amendment. But it is obvious that the amendment was intended not to cure, but to create mischief. Mr. Speaker, we have heard for the last few days input from the commissioners, particularly the non-governmental commissioners. We've heard input from the opposition commissioners on the matter of this work plan. And Mr. Speaker, when you listen to it, the rascality in all of it becomes so obvious. Hold on, Zulfi. I will tell you what the rascality is. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you asked. Because, Mr. Speaker, directly related to the integrity of our voters list is this question of claims and objections. And, Mr. Speaker, according to GCOM, let me tell you what GCOM says about claims and objections. It is important to ensure accuracy and transparency of the official list of electors. This is what GCOM says on its website. They say essentially it is an important mechanism by which GCOM ensures the integrity of the list. Mr. Speaker, It is known that 3 critical activities are undertaken during this time, and I will simplify it so that the smallest child could understand. Claims, which is basically saying, I am entitled to be on the list, but I'm not. And therefore, I am putting a claim in that you got to put me there because I lawfully belong there. Objections, where someone who has no business being on the list is on the list. And of course, transfers, where I appear on the list in one geographic location, but I've since moved, and I need it to be reflected on the list. Because, for example, if I were registered in Lethem, and I am now reassigned to the coast, if my name is not moved, I will have to fly to Lethem to vote. So I want us to understand why claims and objections are so foundational. So, Mr. Speaker, in the current work plan that GCOM has, there are essentially 5 days given for claims and objections. And I want us to understand the significance of that. Because, Mr. Speaker, since 1992, claims and objections have lasted for anywhere between 21 days, up to 21 days. There have been instances where there were 14 days, but with agreement of the parties involved. 14 days for claims, 7 days for objections. And this has been our practice for over 30 years. And understand that this time span wasn't chosen by accident. It came out of the experience of what GCOM needed in order to ensure and imbue integrity into the electoral process. So, Mr. Speaker, what you have happening here is that this period has been reduced to 5 days. It's been reduced to 5 days. And so, less than a quarter of what was regarded as the bare minimum. Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that this is not administrative adjustment. This is a wholesale, just an erosion of a foundational function that ensures the integrity of our elections. So, Mr. Speaker, I want us to consider also a catch-22 that this 5-day window that they have put in place causes. Now, under the law, let's take objections, for example. And again, I am stating this as simply as possible because I want the youngest child to understand how the PPPC is going about disenfranchising Guyanese, robbing them of their right to choose a government of their choice. Mr. Speaker, when you think about objections, when an objection is lodged against someone on the list, GCOM is required to notify both the objector and the objectee. The objector, the person making the objection, the objectee, the person being objected to. The law mandates that notice must be given for a hearing, and that notice must reach the person 2 clear days before the actual hearing. However, Mr. Speaker, we must understand that in the context of a 5-day exercise, this legal requirement collapses under its own weight. How, you may ask? Let's consider the timelines. So, day 1, an objection is lodged. Day 2, GCOM processes and issues notices. Day 3 or 4, the notice is received. And day 5, a hearing is held. Now, this timeline that I've put out here presupposes flawless execution. And we know that that is not a reality in this country. We know that. So, the practical implications are these. GCOM will either have to breach its 2-day notice, violating the law, or proceed with hearings that give the affected parties inadequate time, a breach of due process. So, Mr. Speaker, either way, this is procedurally defective. Mr. Speaker, it will mean that large numbers, essentially this is what it will mean, that large numbers of people who may be on the list and who are not entitled to be on the list will not be removed from the list. That is what it means. And this is important because I want us to remember that the last cycle of registration ended a few days ago on May 31st. Why is this significant? Because that preliminary list ought to be subjected to a process of claims and objections that will cull the list, purify the list, cleanse the list, and that has to be done in 5 days. It means that the list as is the list that we will get. Now let's look on the list as is. And this is where, Mr. Speaker, enter the Venezuelan migrants, right here. Because my colleague, the Honorable Shara Duncan, alluded to the fact that they were on the ground and they were told by Venezuelan migrants that they're awaiting birth certificates. It is alleged that at the last NTC Congress or conference, birth certificates were doled out. Hundreds and thousands. Mr. Speaker, we warned when we were doing in this National Assembly the Registration of Births and Deaths Act, the amendment to it. We warned that what would happen is that persons who were not deserving of a birth certificate would be given a birth certificate. And this is what we are seeing. Mr. Speaker, you know what? You know what our scrutineers are being confronted with? Our scrutineers are being confronted with a phenomenon of people with names like Carlos James with a birth certificate, but cannot speak a lick of English, but they have a birth certificate. And do you know what that means? And you know, I know they would say this. They love to say that this is the role of the scrutineer, but the truth is that no scrutineer is trained, nor do they have the authority to turn back an applicant with a prima facie legal birth certificate. So the scrutineering is not going to solve the problem. So they have rigged these elections from the issuance of birth certificates. So the truth is that we could come here and we could debate all day. The fix is in. Because they rigged it from the issuance of birth certificates.
The bandits are inside the house grilled up. Bandits are inside the grill.
And so, you know, Mr. Speaker, I heard the Honorable Attorney General talking about reinforcing, you know, the security and talking about banditry. But what they are doing in the name of security, it is like you are removing the door. You're taking the locks off of the door in response to a security breach. That's what they're doing here. And so, Mr. Speaker, what this government has done is engineered the population right before our very eyes. That is what they have done. And we have been warning about it for years. But you know what? This government has a lot of money to spend on propaganda. And they've spent a lot of time calling us on this side of the house riggers, etc., to distract from the fact that they are absolutely the ones culpable of undermining the will of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder we can't have the results of the census, because they just do not want us to know. Because remember, a census is a snapshot of the population of your country at a particular date, in a particular period. So they know that if they release the results of the census, it will show what it will show, and it will bring into question the very sharp increase in numbers that we are seeing on this bloated voters list. This is why they're not giving us the census, because they are attempting to engineer the population. Mr. Speaker, another example of this, and they're doing it strategically. They're choosing certain areas in which to do it. They're doing it in areas that they wish to shift the demographics. Because, so for example now, if I live at, let's say, Lot 10 Queenstown, I have lived at Lot 10 Queenstown all of my life. But when I check on the list, there got 15 other people living at Lot 10 Queenstown. If I want to challenge that, it's 3 days for claims, I think, and 2 days for objections. I have 2 days to challenge that. That is the mischief. That is the wickedness that this government is perpetuating. And you see all of them getting up and walk out because they know that they have been caught with their pants down. And on this residency requirement, Mr. Speaker, I want us to understand what is happening here. Because the question remains, if I am living at a particular address, and I know people not living at this address, how many people are willing to stand up to challenge that system? How many people will stand to challenge that system? Because the minute they do that, they face political victimization. And they have to be worried that they're going to lose the little 10-day job that they have. But, Mr. Speaker, what this comes down to, and the heart of this matter, is that the Attorney General has amended the law so that it no longer speaks about residence, it speaks about an address. Right? This means that persons obviously can put an address even if they don't live there. Mr. Speaker, by the amendments passed by the Honorable Attorney General in this House, this is now legal. I could put an address even though I don't live there. And so, Mr. Speaker, what used to be clear-cut questions of electoral fraud and list padding, things that could be exposed, that could be challenged, that could be brought before the courts, have now been legalized by the series of amendments brought by this government over the many years that we have been in this National Assembly. The rules have been changed in a way that they shut down scrutiny. It is not that questionable practices are now allowed. It is that they have been legalized, and this is what I want the people to understand, that they are now beyond challenge. There is no more opportunity for a concerned citizen or a concerned group to raise valid objections and have it tested in court, because the very definition of what is allowed has been rewritten to protect these illegal practices. And so, Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing here is not just bad policy, it is the deliberate closing off of the legal and democratic tools that will allow the public to call this out. So what a guy needs to do. And when you think it's bad, Mr. Speaker, it gets worse. Because what you see by the amendments that have been passed over the years, as my colleague, Ms. Sarabo Hali alluded to, and Mr. Sherrod Duncan, and Mr. Roysdale Ford, is the continuous erosion and legalizing of mischief and of wickedness. And so, Mr. Speaker, you look at that work plan by GCOM, the fix is in. That is where the mischief is. You look at it, and you see that there are some key timelines. Mr. Speaker, there are some key timelines, for example, and Commissioner Charles Corbin raised this note. He raised this concern. He noted that there's a provision that warrants closer scrutiny, because according to the plan, the published draft plan, political parties and list of candidates will be informed of any defects in their submissions. Now, we know that the list of candidates is what basically allows political parties, and you would do well to be quiet and listen and learn. You'll be quiet, you should be quiet and listen and learn. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that there is a period of 2 days for political parties to remedy the errors in their submissions. And the opposition commissioner made the point, Mr. Speaker, that while the larger parties, us in this house here, whilst the larger parties may have the resources, may have the logistics, and the established networks to navigate such a tight timelines, smaller parties do not. And so it is entirely possible that by this mere administrative maneuvering, smaller parties may be unable to participate in this election. Now, people will say, you from a big party, you shouldn't care. But we must care, because the very essence of democracy is to give our people...
Honorable member, I'm just thinking about relevance to the amendment before us. And I don't want to debate on it. I'm cautioning you, okay?
Thank you.
Because the process you're meandering, I don't think we have changed for decades. For decades. And don't forget, I have been around for more than 4.5 in the system.
Mr. Speaker, I am going to repeat what I said. I've said, and it is relevant, Mr. Speaker, in the context. It is important, Mr. Speaker, in the context of the discussion that we've been having all morning. And Mr. Speaker, I am aware that past practice has given parties as much as 30 days to do this. It is on record at GCOM. No.
We were talking about to correct the list, and you were saying 2 days the administrating issue. To do what now? Tell me.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I will start so that I can explain properly. And you know, Mr. Anil Nandal is over there and he has a lot of big talk. But if he will allow me to speak, I will explain to him. Mr. Speaker, the point that I am making is that when you examine the plan, it gives parties 2 days. 2 days to remedy inaccuracies that are discovered on their list of candidates. That is what it does. And I will give you the specific time frame because I have it written down here. Parties, political parties and list of candidates will be informed of any defects in their submission on the 15th of July and will be expected to correct those defects by the 17th of July. That is what GCOM work plan says. A mere 2-day window. It therefore means, Mr. Speaker...
No, we are not arguing that. We are arguing that you said they had up to 30 days. Right? The 30 days is what I'm... Never did.
It
Never
means,
did, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It means, Mr. Speaker, that the smaller parties that do not have our logistical network ability will suffer.
Come on, I asked you just now to go back on track with this and don't debate and argue with me over the administrative issues with GCOM. And I said also that as far as I know, for the 4.5 decades I've been involved in the political process, there hasn't been legislation to affect this. And this is not before us now. So I don't know, we're debating GCOM's administrative role. We're bringing GCOM's discussions with respect to the administration of elections to the House now, when we have an amendment to a specific piece of legislation. Good? And I'll tell you, if smaller parties are serious, they would do it right the first time. And I have been in a party which has been commended, right? So please, let's leave this where it is. And let's get back to the amendment dealing with the omission which the Attorney General is trying to remedy now.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I note, Mr. Speaker, that we are in a parliamentary debate. I note your comments, Mr. Speaker, and I would want to remind this honorable House about a recent occurrence. Y'all remember the local government election? Y'all remember when it was the Honorable Sonia Parag, was it her district, that had people who were dead signing the list of nominators? And you come to tell us that it's not relevant what I'm saying?
Come back to the relevance to this particular piece of legislation.
Mr. Speaker, I am telling you the relevance. I am telling you the relevance because it was the honorable member on the other side who issued an apology. The Vice President issued an apology to the family for their names appearing on the list. The emotional distress Mrs. Jacobs' family felt. So, Mr. Speaker, it is directly correlated. It is directly correlated.
I'm still trying to see the correlation because we're dealing here with appointing a deputy.
Mr. Speaker, respectfully, the people of Guyana see the correlation, and that is what is important to me.
So apparently you've run out of arguments now for not supporting the bill.
Wow!
I have, again, to caution you to let us stay relevant to what's before.
Mr. Speaker, it is relevant. Mr. Speaker,
honorable members, again, please.
Mr. Speaker, it is relevant. Mr. Speaker, as a debater, we know that unless I am engaging in unparliamentary language, etc., I ought to be allowed to make my point.
As a debater, you have to stay within the rules of the standing order.
I am staying within the rules, sir. I am staying within the rules. What you are doing is interfering with my ability to speak to the people of Guyana. This is the people's house.
Honorable members, I ask you to come back to the bill before us, the amendment before us.
I will come back to the bill. I will come back to the bill, Mr. Speaker. I will come back to the bill. And as I continue, Mr. Speaker, in what I was saying, because I've never left the bill, I've never left it. People may want to say, oh, why are you concerned about this? You from a big party, you got logistics. But I'm making the point that the essence of democracy is that we got to give people the ability to choose. And we cannot use administrative sleight of hand to rob the people of Guyana. We cannot do that, Mr. Speaker. And so we got to ensure that the procedural requirements do not lend to the people of Guyana being robbed. And this is what this work plan is facilitating. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what is you know what is so frustrating about it? It is directly tied to the process of GCOM. Because 3 commissioners could get together with the chairman and foist this atrocity on the people of Guyana. And you want to tell us it's not relevant? I'll end by saying this, Mr. Speaker. I'll end by saying this. Because the PPP, and they did it here this morning, Honorable Nanda has a lot to say. They've been parading Lowenfield and Myers and Mingo as a part of electoral abuse. I am responding.
Honorable Member Mr. Vikash, allow the honorable members to speak, and you're using a word I've cautioned people on.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am making the point. I am making the point, Mr. Speaker, that the PPP has spent the last 5 years accusing the opposition of being riggers, of wanting, listen to me, of wanting to thwart the will of the people. They did it this morning. But what we have just laid bare is that they, in fact, are the riggers, and they've rigged it without one vote being cast.
Honorable members, you need an extension to continue.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the honorable member to be given an extension in keeping with the standing orders. Thank you.
Honorable member, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In closing, I will say, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will say this. In closing, Mr. Speaker, we vilify Lowenfield and Myers and Mingo. Comrade Walden Lawrence as proof of electoral abuse. But I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. If it was wrong then, it is wrong now. A system, Mr. Speaker, that was allegedly abused in 2020 should not now be restructured to allow for less public scrutiny. That's what they're doing by giving you 2 days to file objections and 3 days for claims. But they are the guardians of democracy. Them. Mr. Speaker, like I said, this is like responding to a security breach by removing the locks off the door. Mr. Speaker, they claim to be doing this to be preventing rigging, but the real rigging is being built into the system by design. Mr. Speaker, that is what is happening here. Through this weakened claims and objections period, Mr. Speaker, and these quiet changes to the law, and then Nandal will come and say, Mr. Speaker, this is a small amendment. It ought not to draw debate. But wrapped in all of that charm and guile is a degree of wickedness and capriciousness that we have to call out, Mr. Speaker. This is not reform like he is saying. This is not reform, this is rigging. This is rigging in advance. This is rigging by law. And this is rigging under the cover of legitimacy. And so, Mr. Speaker, while they flood the airwaves with their propaganda and they smear others as the threats to democracy, they're coming here and they're laying the groundwork. They're laying the groundwork to steal the upcoming elections long before any Guyanese casts their first vote. They want Guyanese to be trapped in the past whilst they actively sabotage our future. Mr. Speaker, let us be very clear that putting people on the voters list who do not live here and who do not meet the requirements is not a clerical error.
It is an attack on the sovereign will of the people of Guyana, because what it does, Mr. Speaker, is that it creates a dangerous opening for non-Guyanese to be injected into our political processes, giving them the ability to undermine us from within, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will end by saying this. This conduct, the attitude of this government is reckless, and it exposes us and it exposes our political system to infiltration by those who would seek to undermine the territorial integrity of this nation. And I know that the people of Guyana know what I'm talking about. Mr. Speaker, I will end by saying this, and I will end by saying this without apology, that if we remain silent and if we refuse to act, we are complicit in our own disenfranchisement. Mr. Speaker, elections are not won on voting day. They are lost based on the lack of integrity of the process. And when that process is compromised, Mr. Speaker, elections is a performance. It's just a mere act. Mr. Speaker, the outcome is a lie. And I'm ending by saying to the people of Guyana that the PPP has shown us what they are prepared to do. The question now is what we are prepared to do to stop them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member, Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Zulfikar Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this amendment, as the Attorney General rightly said, is a simple amendment. And my friend them over there always try as much as possible. When the truth are being spoken, they always try to create noise to drown out the truth. But that will never happen in our country, because the people of this country know who have their interests, and they will continue to ensure that the interests are taken care of come September the 1st. Mr. Speaker, as I said, that this amendment is a part of a comprehensive reform to amend Section 2.1 of the Principal Act, bring renewed direction to the definition of supernumerary returning officer, and the revised definition now reads, supernumerary returning officer means a supernumerary returning officer of a polling sub-district of polling district 3, 4, and 6, and a deputy supernumerary returning officer. This amendment is far more than a technical adjustment. It is a deliberate and substantive clarification that fortifies structural integrity of our electoral process. By defining the scope and status of these officers, particularly with the highly populated regions 3, 4, and 6, we are reinforcing operational command, eliminating ambiguities and securing the lines of authority essential for the lawful and orderly conduct of elections. And Mr. Speaker, over the last 4.5 years, the People's Progressive Party civic government would have brought to this National Assembly a number of amendments to the Representation of the People's Act to ensure that we have election that is transparent, an election that is free and fair, and elections that represent the will of the people of our country. And Mr. Speaker, I want, and I will deal with some of the issues in a moment that were raised by both Honorable Ford and my good friend, Honorable Amanza Walter Desir. Good. But, yes, Honorable Body, right. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to list First of all, I want to list some of those amendments. So, no one from the opposition benches spoke about those amendments that we did in this honorable House. These amendments, or those amendments, were not there prior to the 2020 general and regional election. These amendments were put forward by the People's Progressive Party civic government to ensure that we don't have another fiasco that took place in our country in 2020, where the democratic will of the Guyanese people in government at that time was trying to deny the will of the people of our country. Never in the history of our country, our government and the People's Progressive Party will allow that to happen. Never in the history. And Mr. Speaker, I can remember the Attorney General, the honorable member, would have consulted with a number of stakeholders, people from different cross-sections of society. And we came up with a number of those regulations and those amendments. This is not the PPP's amendment that we amended the Representation of the People Act. This is the amendment that came out of because of extensive consultation that took place in different parts of the country. And Mr. Speaker, the opposition failed to attend those consultations. If they had all these ideas and they want to amend and ensure that we have a perfect electoral laws in this country, why didn't they came to the consultation to put their proposal on board? These proposals here are these amendments that we amended the Representation of the People Act were amendments and proposal that was put forward by those interest groups across this country. The Attorney General and his team consulted widely across this country, and every single stakeholders, every single political parties were invited to those consultations, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to just list a few. For the future election, for the elections on the 4th of September 2025, we will have in law serial numbering of statement of poll forms in similar manner as with the case of ballot papers. It had serial number, but not with the case of the ballot paper. Probably these people don't know what is in the elections law. We will have the template for the statement of poll form, like ballot paper, will be encrypted and sent by electronic email to overseas printer with the relevant established technical and security instruction to prevent the template from falling into the wrong hands. Those are the transparency that we are talking about and the amendments that we have put forward. Mr. Speaker, another amendment that we have made to ROPA, depending on the number of parties contesting the election, only the required number of copies of statement of poll form plus 5% must be printed, and that is in ROPA. That is law. You will not print excessive form that can be manipulated when the process happens. Those are the transparency we put into the law. So I don't know these people or these honorable members coming here beating their chests, saying that this election will be manipulated. Mr. Speaker, and I will talk about GCOM's work program. I will talk about GCOM's work program. Mr. Speaker, I am just responding to what was raised what was raised in this National Assembly, so that the people in this country will not have false and wrong impression and create doubt in the minds of the electorate, because very shortly we will be going to the poll, and the electorate will make that wise decision again to continue to support the People's Progressive Party Civic. Mr. Speaker, another amendment that we put in Roper: all extra statement of poll form must be kept in the secure custody of a representative or respective returning officer. Additionally, statement of poll form that may be requested as a result of damage must be provided by the returning officer via the deputy or relevant deputy returning officer. The damage SOP form must be returned to the returning officer before the replacement are uplifted. So you replace the form and you send in the damage form so you can have accountability. That is the amendment that we put. Those are laws. Those are the laws that we pass in this National Assembly. There will be legal provision, Mr. Speaker. There will be legal provision for all used and unused statement of poll forms to be accounted for by the ROs and the returning officer by the POs and the returning officer respectively. So this is not a free-for-all anymore. Up to now we are waiting, the Guyanese people are waiting for the AP and UAFC to produce their statements of poll for 2020. Where is it? So, Mr. Speaker, also, this process will be done on a statement of poll account form, similar to what is used with the statement of ballot form that the POs normally use. And more importantly, this process will be scrutinized and observed by parties' agents so that they will be part of the process. And I can go on and list all the other amendments to the Roper. Mr. Speaker, these amendments are here. These amendments were made into laws to ensure that we have transparent and free and fair and democratic election in our country. That is why the People's Progressive Party brought these amendments and make it into laws. And gone are the days, Mr. Speaker, when ROs, POs, and returning officer for electoral district will do things or try to manipulate the votes to ensure they put a party in office. No more. Remember what happened at the Ashmin's building. Remember the manipulation what took place there. Mr. Speaker, so this here is another amendment that we have brought to the Roper, because we don't want to take chance to ensure that when the time comes and you don't have a SRO, you don't have a DSRO, then when the SRO try to fail or fail to attend the count, then the process will stop. That is why that this amendment is important, that we put it into law so that whenever the SRO cannot continue with the count, we will have the DSRO take over. We remember what happened at Ashmin's. People feigned sickness. People were taken to the hospital forcefully by wheelchairs. When they reached there, they told the doctor they were forced to come here to stop the process that were happening there. 5 months. 5 months. Yeah, 5 months. The people of this country waited for the results of an election. 5 months. These amendments that we have put into the Representation of the People Act will ensure that we have elections result timely and we have the count done in an efficient manner. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with some of the issue that was raised by the opposition just now. For example, Honorable Roysdale Ford said that the chairperson for GCOM is under pressure. Mr. Speaker, this government, the People's Progressive Party civic government, never in the history of this country ever appointed a chairman unconstitutionally to the chairman's office in this country, GCOM chairman's office. And now we are saying that the Caribbean Court of Justice said that the appointment of the chairman under the APNU-AFC was unconstitutionally, the late Patterson. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, we heard about the GCOM's work plan. The work plan is in compliance with the statutory requirements. The statutory requirements for the conduct of general and regional elections. GCOM didn't breach any constitution. GCOM didn't breach any requirement. GCOM didn't breach any administrative requirements. All the measures, all the items that are listed to be done on the work plan are in line with statutory and administrative requirements from GCOM. So, Mr. Speaker, then we heard about 2 days. 2 days party have to correct their list. Any party that worth their salt will not have to do long correction. I can tell you, the PPP doesn't have to do any correction for the last election. We sent in our list, it was accepted, and it was a good list. It was a list that satisfied all the requirements that we have in GCOM. Mr. Speaker, when we started continuous registration, the purpose of continuous registration was to ensure that the Guyana Elections Commission be in a state of preparedness at any time for elections. We have scrutineers on a regular, permanent basis from the 2 major political parties that are at GCOM. We have a process where we have scrutiny from these scrutineers. Every single person who go to do a transaction, their documents are being examined by these scrutineers. We have scrutineers also who accompany GCOM staff to verify the addresses of these persons who are doing the transaction. The process is clean. The process is transparent. This verification of these registrants is tight. Put it in that, because everyone is involved. You have a right to make an objection. So, when people come to this National Assembly and talk about bloated lists, talk about dead names, there are processes to remove those people from the list. All the requirements are there. I don't know if the opposition doesn't know that these laws exist. You have the last cycle of registration. What happened? The last cycle of registration, only 9 objections was made. 9 objections were made the last time. And they come in here, come talk about bloated lists. They come in here, come talk about dead person on the list. And they have a process, there is a process where they can use to object to all the dead names, to object to all those who they believe are phantom names, but they are not doing anything to it. They are not doing anything to it. Mr. Speaker, let us not forget that no other than the Chief Justice ruled that residency is not a requirement for registration. You are Guyanese, you are entitled to be registered. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, that there are rules, there are requirements where the opposition can use. But they come in here today because I predicted that. I told the Attorney General that they will come here today with a prepared speech, come in to talk about the first part of the amendment, and they will come here and will not change the speech, and they will lambaste everything because they are not prepared for the election. The first time in the history of this whole world, opposition is not prepared for election. We would have clutched it with our hand if we were in opposition, because we are always prepared for any election of this country. We are the incumbent. We should be afraid of election. Instead, we are saying we are ready for election. We are ready for election. And they are so disjointed, Mr. Speaker. The commissioner representing the opposition parties are saying that they don't ready. They're not leading in one breath to just to please people. Say, yeah, we're ready. But this time they are not ready for an election. They are not ready. They are in all manner of problems. They are in all manner of problems. So, Mr. Speaker, this amendment that we are doing here today, or making here today, closes that space that we are talking about, where the SRO, now, if unavailable, will have a DSRO to continue that function that he can perform, he or she can perform. So that is all this amendment says. Simple, very simple. So that's the amendment that we're talking about. So it ensures that individuals entrusted, Mr. Speaker, with key responsibilities at the sub-district level are clearly identified, properly empowered, and legally bound by statute to execute their duty with integrity and transparency. We are not saying that we will identify someone if that person doesn't satisfy the requirements. That is why we are putting it in law, to ensure that it is enshrined in statute, so that no one at the end of the election, when they lose the election, they will cry foul, because we have it in the laws, we have it in the statute, and that is why we want transparency, accountability, free and fair election in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, in this way, we are not only referring to our electoral laws, we are affirming a principle that every role within the electoral process must be clearly defined, legally anchored, and functionally effective. That is what we are reiterating here today. In doing so, Mr. Speaker, we are taking another step towards a system that is not only lawful in form, but credible in substance and worthy of the public trust. Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate this point. I am saying, in doing so, we are taking another step towards a system that is not only lawful in form, but credible in substance and worthy of the public's trust. That is what we are doing here today. The appointment of the DSRO is intended to ensure that there is a clear distinction between the position of the SRO and the DSRO. As I said, before the creation of the SRO with the division of those sub-districts that we have created, now there has always been DROs. And the DROs will mirror, or the DSRO will mirror the function of the DROs. That is it. That is all we are talking about. That is the amendment. So, Mr. Speaker, it is important also, as I said, we brought these amendments here. We not brought it because one night or one day we woke up and said that we want amendments. We saw what took place in 2020. We saw what took place in 2020. And if I was sitting down over there, I would have come here today and say I support this amendment and finish about it. Never open up debate on electoral matter in this country. Because the most incredible part are the people them who should be afraid of ever discussing any electoral issue is the AP and UFC. They have a history. They have a history of tainted election in this country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, when we came to office in 2020, and we saw all the loopholes that were used to manipulate the votes and results of the 2020 election, we had to take a step to ensure that the election processes were modified to guarantee that never again must the AP and UAFC use their puppets to manipulate the election processes, especially tabulation of elections result in this country. That is why we brought these amendments. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we move to revamp, or we have already started the process some time ago to revamp the Representation of the People Act, to close all the loopholes that were so visible and so manipulated in 2020. In this regards, many new checks and balances were introduced into ROPA through a consultative process and signed into law in December of 2022. As I said, these are very, very important amendments that we can have to ensure that we have free and fair election. The other issues raised by the opposition are issues just to have excuse to delay the process. The Ghana Elections Commission's work plan have certified all the requirements for elections. All the timeline in the work plan has certified all the requirements, statutory requirements, and administrative requirements. So there is nothing in the elections or the Ghana Elections Commission's work plan that can stymie the election. We will ensure, Mr. Speaker, we will work with that, as I said. As a government, we are proud and we are prepared to go to this election to ensure that we continue the progress that we started in 2020. We will continue because that, and this is the only opposition in the world are afraid. They are afraid of elections. We have a process. We have a process that we started when we started continuous registration. The idea of continuous registration was to ensure that GCOM, the Guyana Elections Commission, be prepared at any time for election. And we are seeing it today. What we started some years ago, we are seeing it today. We have 29 permanent offices in this country, the Guyana Elections Commission, where we have scrutineers from both political parties, the opposition and the government. We have mobile registration process. We have regular updating of the list. We have a process where the GRO sends to GCOM person who died, whose names will be taken off the list. We have a process, if the opposition were their salt, they would have used the claims and objection period so that they can go and object to people's name who they feel doesn't belong to the list. All these checks and balances that we have, and they are not making use of it. They are coming here to cry and say that the process is not working. But we are coming here to ensure that we have a transparent process. We put system in place so the elections will be credible. The elections will be above board. And the elections will be recognized by international observers. That is why we are putting all these amendments so that we don't want to leave any loopholes, Mr. Speaker, so that we can ensure that the elections will be free, fair, and transparent. So at the end of it all, everyone wins. Everyone wins. And these amendments are geared, as I said, to ensure that we have credible elections, we have transparent election, and the People's Progressive Party, civic government, and the party, our party, will ensure at all times the democratic will of the people is respected. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, I think the will of the Parliament is that we have lunch.
you.